If anyone, this is the Yorkshire Post's question and answer session with South Yorkshire Mayor Oliver Coppard on the potential plans to reopen Doncaster Sheffield Airport. Thanks very much for your time today, Oliver.
My pleasure.
Brilliant. The way it's going to work, we've got a lot of questions sent in already, so thank you everyone for your engagement with this. We will slowly go through those, and then if you have any other questions, please just leave them in the comments and we'll try and pick everything up. But like I said, we have had a lot, so we'll do our best to get through everything. If you've missed part of this, it will be available to watch afterwards on our Facebook page and also on our website as well, and it will also be covered in the paper tomorrow, so make sure you pick up a copy of that. I guess a good place to start, I would say one of the main comments we've had is people have said, why haven't we had an answer on the airport reopening until now? We're due to get that on the 9th of September, but I just wondered if, first of all, I guess if you could talk a bit about the process that yourself and the Mayoral Combined Authority is going through to get to the stage where you'll make a decision.
Of course, yeah. So look, I mean, first things first, just say, I want to get to an answer as swiftly as possible too. I recognise the frustration, of course I do. The sooner we can get to that answer, the better. But it is hugely complicated. Like, reopening an airport is no small thing. You know, there's a huge amount of work to be done. If anyone who has ever bought a house thinks about the process you have to go through, the first house I ever bought took me a year from putting the offer in, having accepted, to getting the keys was a year. We're three years out from Peel announcing that strategic review, 2 years away, 2 years since the airport closed, and we're on the cusp of taking that funding decision. What that funding decision will be, I don't know. I can't give anyone any guarantees, actually. But we're working at pace. But it's hugely complex. If you think about the number of things that we need to try and figure out, not least, do we have enough money to sustain this project into the long term to get it to a point of viability and profitability? Now, I don't think anyone's in any doubt about the desire of people like me, certainly Doncaster Council, people right across South Yorkshire, to reopen the airport, but these airports don't exist on desire alone. They have to exist on money and funding. And we have to make sure they have a good strategic fit, that we know that we can get the passengers in, that we know we can get the freight, that we know that we can redevelop the whole site, and that the lease arrangements work in our favour to allow us to do all of that. And we're still working that through. We're still working that question through. So look, it's complicated. And this, I think if people are looking at what we're trying to do, I think people would understand and recognise it is complicated. And I know people want it open. And I know people want us to take the decision. Of course they do. And that's fair. But I can't just take that decision because people are shouting at me on the internet. I have to take that decision in the interest of the whole of South Yorkshire, not just for me and for us for now, but for the next 20, 30 years.
I wonder if you could talk a bit, the decision is going to happen, like I said, on the 9th of September. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how that process happens with yourself and the MCA board.
Well, so we've got it in as a key decision for the 9th of September. That's not to say it will definitely happen on the 9th of September, just so people are aware of that. Like we are trying to take that decision as soon as possible, and it could be that we take an extraordinary meeting at a future date because we're still working through the problem. And the challenges are real. There are real challenges in there that we need to overcome, that we need to be assured about legally. So look, just so people understand the way this system works, there are people who work in this building, lawyers, my chief exec, my finance director, who are statutory officers. They are people who are designated by law to protect the money of taxpayers, this organisation, do things by the book. And I can only take decisions that they tell me I am able to take legally. Now, I've told them what I want to try and achieve, which is to try and reopen DSA, but they have to tell me that we can do that. And they have to tell the other leaders of the local authorities that we can do that. And so we're working with people in this organisation, externally, experts in the field of aviation, to make sure we're taking smart decisions to allow us to get to that point. So that's what we're trying to do, and it's really complicated. If you think about the number of moving parts in all of this, not just the 4 leaders of the local authorities who have to help us take decisions in this building because they are part of the MCA legally, but then all the other different stakeholders, not least other airports. Clearly, we've got stakeholders in terms of the government, we've got people in terms of the private sector who have an interest in this. We're negotiating with the landowners, Peel, on the lease arrangements as well. And then we're trying also to answer all the other questions about freight, passengers, air traffic control, CAA and everything else. There's a huge amount of complexity to this problem. and we want to take that decision as soon as we can, but we have to do it in the right way, the proper way. And I can't legally prejudge that decision. I can have my preference, and I've made clear my preference, which is to reopen DSA, but I can't prejudge that decision because it's not my decision alone. In law, it has to be a decision of the whole of the MCA, and that's the decision we want to take.
Brilliant. Now, you talked just there about your preference to reopen the airport. I wondered if some of these might seem very obvious, but I wondered if you could talk about, obviously the pros in opening the airport, but then also some of the, negatives that might be incorporated into that. What are you weighing up? What you're thinking of?
Of course, look, so huge pros in favour of the airport is it creates jobs, it creates growth. It means that we have a gateway to South Yorkshire for international visitors and a way for people then to do business outside of South Yorkshire directly and immediately. And any number of businesses have said to me, look, we'd really like to fly out of DSA as well as clearly people. All of us who live in South Yorkshire would like an easy airport to fly from. So that's absolutely right. And that's the big kind of win potentially, is that we get all of that. I mean, if we get to fill out Gateway East as a development site, it's the biggest permission site in Europe at this point, particularly with sustainable aviation and some of the companies that we know want to develop their sustainable aviation footprint, particularly in South Yorkshire because of our world-leading expertise. We say it all the time, we've already got Boeing, Rolls-Royce and others in the region. We want to build on that. University of Sheffield doing some pioneering work as well when it comes to sustainable aviation. So if we can build that out as well, it creates even more jobs, even more growth. We've designated it as an investment zone, so we get something called business rate retention, which allows us to bring in money into the MCA if we do develop out that site on the back of the work that we want to do there. So it's got all of that going for it. On the less positive side, the airport never hit a high enough passenger numbers under the last owners to get to a point of viability, according to them. And I've got no reason to disbelieve them. But we think we can do more than that. Now we've got to show how. And we've got to show that we can get to that level in a time frame that allows us to make enough money to keep the airport going, bring in the carriers, the airlines who will help us to do that in a competitive marketplace. We've also got to make sure that we've got that business interest in the wider site, but also that we've got the infrastructure to support that development. So anyone that's been to DSA will know you've clearly got the Great Yorkshire Way that leads up to it, but we've got to put in more infrastructure if you want that to work, not least electricity, water runoff, how do you connect to the M18, then onto the M1? Can we get a rail link in there? Can we get a tram train link in there? All of that is something we have to work through now, rather than getting to that problem once we spent 100 million quid and saying, oh, actually we didn't understand this is what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And so that's the challenge I'm faced with, is can I guarantee taxpayers that we're taking a calculated risk, because it will be a risk if we do take that decision, but a calculated risk that says we think we're going to be okay. Or am I taking a decision now which says actually we're likely to lose a load of money on this, and then in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years time, actually this isn't going to be a viable airport, we've lost that money. And that's what I'm weighing up, because my job is to make sure that as South Yorkshire we're moving this region forward, but doing that in a smart way, because once you spend that money it's gone. And the opportunity cost of that is real. Do we want to spend that money on something else in Doncaster? The city centre, for instance. Do we want to spend that on something else in terms of transport connectivity? That's what I've got to weigh up. My preference is the airport, because I think the airport's a huge opportunity, but it's got to be done in the right way, and we've got to be able to show people that, not least the lawyers, the accountants in this building, as well as the leaders of the local authorities and the government, that we're doing that for the right reasons, that actually we know our sums and we've got the sums right and we can move it forward.
Brilliant. So for anyone who's just joined, this is the Yorkshire Post's Q&A with South Yorkshire Mayor Oliver Coppard on whether Doncaster Sheffield Airport might open and the plans around it. Whatever answers you missed so far, you'll be able to watch them back on our Facebook page and the website, and do post any questions in the comments. So one of the questions we received from Paul Houghton on Facebook is about commercial flight operators. He asked it before your speech yesterday, so he asked originally, will flight operators be ready to take off by the spring? Although now we know that might not happen until 2028 if the airport reopens. But I wondered if you can talk about what are the potential plans or conversations for commercial flights.
Yeah, so we're engaging with the market, so people will know that TUI and Wizz were the two subtenants that were using the airport most recently. So obviously we're going back to people that used the airport previously. We're talking to people in the market about who else might want to use DSA for that commercial passenger experience. So like me, I thought DSA on my holidays, and I know people want to do that, and lots of people kind of are attached to that idea in particular. But there is no future, as I said in my speech yesterday, for DSA purely as an airport that just does holiday flights. That isn't going to sustain the airport going forward and get the business in that we need. What we need that airport to be is a full service opportunity for aviation. So freight is a huge opportunity, not least because of when you look at the wider opportunities around Doncaster, Junction 36 in Barnsley, the whole of South Yorkshire's got a big logistics base because we're in the centre of the country, which is great for us. So potentially we can build out that opportunity around freight. We've also got an opportunity for private flights. So anybody that wants to come in on a private flight to Doncaster Sheffield Airport, that's another way of getting in some of that money. And then also the wider site itself is ripe for investment when it comes to sustainable aviation, advanced manufacturing, and the business rate retention money, the money we get back from business rates that we can now, thanks to some of the decisions taken by the government, we can then keep some of that money in South Yorkshire and use that to sustain the airport going forward as well. So there's a whole suite of things that we need to be able to do. Commercial aviation, particularly passenger flights, holiday flights, is part of that, and that's why we're talking to the market. What we think it will happen is it will grow over time. So I think getting back to roughly the numbers that we had before, we think we can do that relatively swiftly. Beyond that, it takes a bit of time to build and build and build. That's where the challenge comes in. Can we do that quickly enough? Is there enough interest in the market to keep the airport going? And that's where we're trying to do our homework and talk to partners and talk to the leaseholders about kind of what that looks like going forward.
On more of the freight side of things, we've got a question from Mick Goater on that. He asked, what cargo operators have you lined up for the airports? I'm guessing some of this might be commercially sensitive. And he says that due to its central location, which he talks about within the UK, cargo operations could be vital.
Yeah, and that's right, and that's absolutely right. And we had the meeting yesterday, business community in Doncaster. There were freight operators there, logistics firms there, who are all saying the same thing, and they're absolutely right. The central location of South Yorkshire is vital to that equation, and we're really lucky to be so well positioned. There are some really brilliant logistics operations going on in South Yorkshire already, some brilliant businesses, and we're talking to everybody really about how we can expand on that. Freight's a massive opportunity for South Yorkshire. We should build on that wherever we can. And I can't talk about specific conversations, as people will hopefully understand, but that is absolutely the plan, to make freight a big part of our operations going forward if we do take that funding decision.
Another question relating to this, these are coming from Mary Mullen. She says, if the airport reopens, will commercial flights definitely start by 2028, or could it become solely a freight airport? And then separately, she basically asks how much, how much revenue is going to be needed for the airport to break even, which might be a tricky one to answer, but I guess if you
No, I think so. Taking that second answer first, that's the 150 million. So it's not just revenue. So sorry, Mary, I don't know if you know this already, so forgive me, but other people may not. So there's the difference between capital and revenue. So revenue is the money that we have to sort of keep the lights on, the day-to-day spending, staff, utilities, you name it, security, whatever it might be. Capital is the money we put into things, so the buildings, the equipment, the stuff that you own. That's the capital money, and there's a difference between capital and revenue, but for the purposes of the question, I'll probably lump them together in terms of just public funds that would go into the project. And that's why we're talking about in excess of £150 million. So we want to kind of, if we can take this decision, want to put that money into the airport to sustain it, to get to a point A, to reopen it. So there's money we're going to need to spend on getting the terminal back to where it needs to be, developing it. In fact, new security equipment. If you go to Luton, where I was the other day, for instance, or Gatwick, where I was as well, like actually what you see is CT machines where you don't have to take the liquid out, right? And that's a new requirement from government, so we're going to have to invest in those sorts of things. We're going to have to invest in kind of making sure that the luggage kind of controls and everything else are in place. Tarting up the terminal a bit. Been closed for a while now. Making sure everything works, as well as kind of putting some lights back in, buying the fire engines, all that stuff is expensive. We've then got to make sure we've got enough money to keep the airport going, and some of that will then come in through revenue that we get from clients and people that want to work at the airport, but some of that we'll have to put in as well. So that's when we talk about £150 million plus, that's the money that we want to put in. But we don't have an endless amount of money. So can we see a pathway to getting to a point where we have enough money to keep it going till we know that it will be commercially viable? That's the question we're trying to answer. Because I think it can be a viable airport and strategically is important to South Yorkshire. Can it be there before we don't have enough money to keep it going? That's the question we're trying to answer. and that's not yet what I'm able to answer sufficiently well to be able to take that decision.
Brilliant, thanks for that answer there, Oliver. So yeah, welcome to everyone who's just joined. This is the Yorkshire Post's Q&A with South Yorkshire Mayor Oliver Coppard. He's given us an hour of his time, so we will be speaking until 3 or when your questions run out, which probably won't happen. But do keep sending the questions in. Thanks very much for the engagement on this. We will try and get through as many as possible. And I have got 3 questions which I've kind of grouped together. They are from Liz Barber, Gustavo Franklin and Glenn Pickard. It feeds into some of the stuff we've just been talking about, where they say, what gives you the confidence? And you might not have this confidence yet because the decision hasn't been made, but what are you looking for to show that Doncaster Council will be able to run an airport better than the experienced operator like Peel? And they've also asked what could be done differently now from when it was a commercial airport.
Yeah, so, well, I've said this all along. I think the private sector are the best people to run airports. I've said that from day one, which is why we've gone out to the market and brought in Munich as a partner to help actually do the work. There's a difference, isn't there, between, and I'm sure people understand this, between who funds it and who runs it. And of course, as the funder, we would have a say over how we want that process to operate going forward. But that shouldn't be a sort of day-to-day decision from people like me or the Mayor of Doncaster or anyone politically to say, right, well, you know, I want a flight to Mallorca, so please get that sorted. It's got to be a kind of strategic conversation with experts in the field, and that's what Fly Doncaster is all about. It's about having that standalone operator, Fly Doncaster, who would then take sensible and smart decisions with expertise at its heart to kind of make that choice about where we need to go, what the commercials look like, where we need to put our focus. Are there operators or businesses we need to bring in, you know, whatever that might be. And I think hopefully the difference we can make is we can be a bit more patient on the timetable, because as a public sector, we don't need to see a return in the same way, because that's not our job. Our job is to make smart long-term strategic decisions and to a certain extent to spend public money to generate wealth, generate opportunity. That's what we're here to do. It's not just simply paying money to get money back. That we don't operate like a business in the same way. But if we can take that long-term view with expertise at its heart, then I think we can start to see over a sort of medium to long time period the impact paying off of that long-term decision making. And look, you know, fair play to Peel. They're a business, right? They are a business who has to show return for their shareholders, and that's at the heart of what they do. And legally, by law, they are required to return money to their investors. That's how they are set up. We're set up differently. And so we're here to try and make life better for residents in South Yorkshire. If we can't afford to do the project, if we can't afford to move it forward, that means we can't take this project forward. But ultimately, we're trying to kind of get to a place where we can make that investment and can move forward with the airport project, because that's what I'm here to do and that's what we're here to do. But we've got to do that with expertise and experts in the field, and that's who we're talking to.
Brilliant. Thanks for that answer, Oliver. We've got, I guess, a similar one to that on the Peel aspect of it. This is from Jason Clark. Jason asked if you know why no other private investors came forward to take over the airport. Do you have any thoughts on?
Loads of private investors came forward to take on the airport. You know, literally dozens and dozens of investors started conversations with us about the airport and whether or not they could take it on as a going concern. There's always been the challenge of Peel owning the site. Right? So Peel have owned that site for years. They don't want to give up that site. That's theirs. I couldn't take someone's house off them. I can't take someone's property off them. That's not how the law works. So Peel own it. We now got through Doncaster a lease that Doncaster negotiated and signed. They've got that lease in place. There were then private sector investments who were looking at that saying, you know, we might be interested. But that deal has to work for both of us, right? It has to work for the private sector. It has to work for us too. And we didn't think on reflection that that was fair. It wasn't a good deal. And so actually it was better to take that challenge on ourselves and then bring in the private sector expertise through a group like Munich and potentially other experts as well that we're looking at and talking to, and then move forward on that basis. There was no shortage of private sector investment that was on the table, but it's got to be the right deal. And we just didn't think it was the right deal. Doncaster, having signed that lease, then kind of wanted to talk to different investors about kind of what they could do within the confines of that lease, and ultimately we just couldn't get over the line. So that's why we are where we are now.
Brilliant. Thanks for that answer. Very good to clarify all of that. Just a reminder to anyone who's just tuning in, this is the Yorkshire Post's Q&A with South Yorkshire Mayor Oliver Coppard on Doncaster Sheffield Airport and the possible reopening plans, please do send your questions in the comment section. We have had a lot. Thank you very much for the engagement. We will try to get to them as many as possible.
It's almost like people are really interested in the airport.
Yes, yes. There we've had over 100 comments, lots of questions, so it's great to have that sort of engagement. One couple of questions from Ian Perkis. Ian, you sent quite a long comment on Facebook, so I've had to distill it a bit, but I think this sums up what you were asking. He says, how is the proposed business case adding up for DSA in the face of competition that has already been approved? I think here he mentioned airport expansions, contracts and expansions for places like Leeds, Bradford and Teesside. So yeah, he's asking how does the business place for opening a new airport stack up when there's all this other expansion and competition?
Okay, well, firstly, not a new airport, right? So like, slightly different challenge. Not to negate the point because it's a fair question. Secondly, we're not operating in a static market, so the aviation market seems to be expanding, and that's why kind of Heathrow are looking to expand, that's why Gatwick are looking to expand, etc. Now I think, I have my concerns to a certain extent about expanding aviation markets. I think South Yorkshire should get a bigger slice of the pie, but I don't necessarily think the market should expand exponentially, personally. But we're now looking at those numbers. That is the essence of what we're trying to understand. Is there enough of a market out there for us to sustain it? Now, I've always thought, and I think the numbers back this up, that there is a market there. There's a strategic case there as well. So it's not just about whether or not there's enough people who want to use the airport. It's about what does it do for the economy of South Yorkshire more broadly. That's part of the equation that we're looking at. So yes, the passenger numbers are important, the freight numbers are important, the private market's important, but more broadly, by having an airport in South Yorkshire, does it create a set of strategic conditions that help us to grow the economy of the region? And that's one of the things that kind of we're also looking at as well. So don't get hung up just on passenger numbers. They're really important, not least because of some of the implications of kind of lease arrangements, everything else, but largely because actually it's a bigger question that we have to answer. How do we create that thriving, sustainable aviation hub? How do we create opportunity? How do we create jobs and growth through the airport rather than just have we got enough passengers?
Just on the growth that we're talking about here, I wondered if, it's now been around 3 years since the airport closed in 2022. What kind of, I guess that was during COVID, so it might be a bit tricky to say, but what kind of loss of investment did that have? What have you guys looked at around the difference between when the airport was up and running?
Well, just on a very basic level, you'll hear from companies that were hoping to either locate or were located there who had to move. I mean, on a very basic level, there were flight schools, for instance, that were out of DSA, which obviously couldn't carry on at DSA anymore. So there was, jobs there, growth there, opportunity there, maybe on a smaller level, but certainly really important. We were talking to companies about whether or not they wanted to invest on Gateway East because they saw the potential to invest on that site, and that's been in abeyance ever since. And there were some big companies that wanted to invest at Gateway East. So there has been a loss, not just of investment, to a certain extent of confidence, because as a result of the decision that was taken to close the airport, which is why we're working so hard to try and get back to a better place. But it's also about kind of the future as well, isn't it? It's about saying, actually, we've got this opportunity here and we're determined to try and maximise that opportunity and bring in that investment. So, for instance, the sustainable aviation work around the airport really only kind of functions effectively if you've got the airport operating at the heart of it. You're not going to get sustainable aviation in there in terms of a market if you don't have the actual runway and everything else operating. So that's one of the challenges that we face. It's got to be looked at holistically. It's got to be looked at in the round if we're going to kind of take that funding decision, and that's what we're trying to do.
Brilliant. We have one more question from Ian Perkis, and it's about the break clause. So for everyone that doesn't know, the lease arrangement that's been negotiated by Doncaster Council with Peel is for an 125 lease on the airport with a 5-year break clause. So that's the time, I guess, to work out the full picture on whether the airport can proceed. I wondered if you could talk about what are the thoughts around what needs to happen in that time, I guess, using the break clause, and if that is missed, is the council and the combined authority is there any other opportunities to get out of it, or is that the 125-year lease?
So people are going to be frustrated about this. It's commercially confidential. So I know some of that's in the public domain, but I can't talk about it more broadly because I'd be breaking that commercial confidentiality. So forgive me, because I'd like to, because it would help me to explain it. It would make my life a lot easier. I wouldn't have to second guess my words every time I was speaking. So bear with me. That's not quite right. Is all I would say. And I can't explain quite why, but it's not quite right. There's some commentary online people will be able to Google. But look, it's not quite right that that's the case. It's not entirely wrong either, but it's not quite right. What we need to do is get the airport to a position of maximum viability and maximum passenger numbers and maximum growth as quickly as we can. I think people understand that. The lease does create some challenges within that. It does. There's no point denying that. And Doncaster Council have signed that in good faith. They've done their best. I kind of now need to operate on the basis that that's where we are, and we've either got to try and kind of find a way through that somehow to get to those passenger numbers that allow us to keep the airport thriving. That's what we want to do anyway. You know, that ultimately there's no point doing this if we're not trying to maximise the passenger numbers, maximise the opportunity of that airport, and that's what we want to do regardless of what the lease looks like. We want to get to that position of maximum viability. I've said 2028 for passengers. If we can do it sooner, we will. I think 2028 is just being frank with people about the timeline. Ros is right when she says actually the airport is actually open right now because you've got companies operating out of it already. I think what we're talking about is a timeline to get to sort of maximum viability, operational capacity, capabilities that we don't currently have. And that's what we're laying out in the work that we're doing so we can understand what those challenges look like, not just because of the lease, but because we want to maximise the opportunity as quickly as we can for jobs and for growth and for opportunity for everyone in South Yorkshire.
So we've got a question from Richard Sidebottoms on this, which has just come through on the Facebook Live. So thank you for your question, Richard. He asks, again, this might be tricky with the commercial considerations, but we'll ask it anyway. He asks, if a foreign group / investor was on the horizon, you know, after the airport is up and running and it's working well, would it be feasible to hand over the lease to them rather than have it as Fly Doncaster, or is that something? Would you like, I guess, the Chancellor and the Command Authority to have this say going forward?
I'd like us to maximise the opportunity for South Yorkshire, particularly for people who live here, or all of us who live, live in South Yorkshire. I want that opportunity to be maximised for my friends, my family. You know, I think everybody feels like that. Look, it is absolutely important that we don't rule out that private sector investment, and we haven't. You know, but it's got to be the right deal for taxpayers. It's got to be the right deal for us. It's got to be the right deal, crucially, for the airport. So no, there's nothing there that stops us from then bringing in that private sector expertise, the private sector investment, and that's what we want to do. And we're not out of that business. You know, we are talking to people all the time about what they might be able to bring to this project, and we will continue doing that regardless. You know, so if we are able to take that decision, if we are able to get the airport back up and running, then of course we would want the private sector to look at what that opportunity looks like in terms of investment and growth. Because we think it's a big opportunity, but we've got to have a deal that is right for them and for us.
Brilliant. I'll let Oliver take a sip of tea. So yeah, thank you for all the questions that are coming in. Just a reminder, the Yorkshire Post, we're speaking to South Yorkshire Mayor Oliver Coppard about the potential reopening of Doncaster Sheffield Airport. We're half an hour in, we've got up to half an hour to go. The questions are still coming in, unsurprisingly. Obviously, a huge amount of interest in this. Jane Nightingale has asked in a comment on Facebook Live, and I think we've spoken about this before, why has the slippage in dates happened? I think she's potentially talking about either the decision date, but potentially also the commercial flight date. So yeah, I wondered if you could talk about those two things.
So anybody interested? I mean, we'll put my speech from yesterday up on, after we've done this. I'll put that up online on my Facebook. So anybody who wants to go and find me on Facebook, on social media, can watch the speech I gave yesterday. It's about 20 minutes, but it's worth watching in full if you've got the time, because I think it lays some of this out in some detail. Essentially, we were hoping to bring in that private sector investment. Doncaster obviously led on that engagement. As I say, there was a significant amount of private sector investment. But once we took that decision that none of those deals were right for the airport going forward, we then had to do a whole load of more due diligence in order to look at whether we can put significant amounts of public money into the airport, because it's a different calculation once we're the main investor. And so kind of we've been doing that work ever since. And it's a hugely complex thing. You know, people say this is taking a long time. I think actually from start to finish where we are now, we're working at record pace. It is genuinely a really swift progress to have made it this far this quickly. We're going to have 1,000 pages of investor grade due diligence on the airport project by the time we get to a decision, and really significant amounts of work are going into this. We're spending money on consultants, on external auditing of our own work to tell us if we've got that right, because we're not just saying marking our own homework. We want people who know this world, know this space, to tell us whether we've got that right and actually hold us to a higher standard, because I'm determined to protect taxpayers' money and make best use of taxpayers' money in South Yorkshire, because that's our money that we need to use for our future, right? So that's really important, and that's why we're taking the amount of time we are. In terms of the 2028 date, look, all I've done is offer some clarity, because I think, as I say, Spring 26 is an open airport. I know Ros has said that. I think there's all sorts of things that will be happening at the airport, hopefully by Spring 26. By 28, we'll have those passenger flights, and there'll be a bunch of things that happen in between, and I think that's fair to say, and all I'm doing is trying to offer some clarity, be as frank as I can with people, because I know they care deeply about the airport. Everyone wants to book the holidays, I do too. So we have absolutely got to be clear with people, and that's what I'm trying to offer. Now we're a bit closer, we know a bit more about the information, what we can and can't do, and what works best. I'll offer that clarity as much as I can and be transparent and as accountable as I possibly can be.
Brilliant, thanks for that answer, Oliver. So we've got two questions here which I'm going to tie together. So there's a question on Facebook from, sorry, forget the pronunciation of your name wrong. This is, I think, from Wei Ming Yao, who asked, can you give a clear time-bound plan within the next 12 months on whether we'll see planes flying again, or whether you're pursuing alternative development? And then Richard Horrocks basically asked, what will happen to the airport site if the gain share funding isn't approved? So I think both these people, I know, are regular airport watchers. Richard's been in touch with me a few times, and seems to be particularly worried about the airport. Look, essentially, we are still trying to work out how to best reopen the airport with the numbers that we now know, the leases it is, the finances that we have. How can we best do that? So no, I can't give you a timetable, because we haven't taken the decision yet, and therefore I can't. It wouldn't be sensible for me to sort of set hairs running by saying there's a specific date in mind. As soon as possible is my commitment, and that's what we've always tried to do, and we are working at record pace. I've seen on Wai Ming Yao's page, he was sort of talking about other things that have happened in the time we've taken. There were airport takeovers happening all over the place. Airport takeovers are a very different thing. Restarting an airport is a much more complex, complicated problem, whilst also changing the ownership and also changing the operating model. That's a difficult thing to do, and it's a very different challenge to one that Manchester Airport Group had when they took over Stansted, for instance. Very different thing that we need to do, and I hope people understand that. In terms of the alternative uses for the site, we've always wanted an airport on that site. Now, look, I'm not prepared to get into a conversation right now about what might happen other than an airport, but I don't think it's helpful. We want to reopen an airport on that site. If we can't do that, then we will look at alternatives, but I don't think that's a helpful conversation, because my priority is getting through this work, doing it with due diligence, being transparent and accountable as I can be, possibly as I can be, talking to our communities and making sure that we're showing that we're kind of absolutely cracking on doing the work. We will take that decision as quickly as we can. I will be absolutely, we can come back and we can make a weekly thing of this if you want to, but look, I just think for now, focusing on that fact, we're trying to get the work done, trying to get it over the line, and trying to reopen the airport is what people need to hear and what we are trying to do. Brilliant, thank you for that answer there, Oliver. So yeah, just to remind everyone, in case you don't know, we're having a Q&A with South Yorkshire Mayor Oliver Coppard on Doncaster Sheffield Airport. We've had a huge amount of questions, so thank you so much for sending those in. More is still coming in now. Thanks for all your engagement on this. We're going to try and get through as many as possible, but we may run out of time. A slightly different subject here. Two quite similar questions. The first is from Richard Sully, who is a senior research fellow in sustainability policy.
Used to work here.
At the University of Sheffield.
Just for clarity. Yeah.
Excellent. Nice. Great to have that clarity. Richard has asked if the public funding is granted to reopen the airport, will the Mayor make public all of the expert advice you've received for and against the decision?
Yeah, look, we'll be absolutely as transparent as possible. Richard knows as well, because I think he signed off the sustainability impact assessment from before, so we can share that as well.
Yeah.
and we'll share kind of all the other work that we've done as soon as we can, as much as we can. There will be commercially confidential things in there, of course there will. But you know, I want to be as transparent as possible. People will see in there the complexity of this deal and the challenges. You know, if we are able to share the vast majority of that, people will see how complex these things are and how much work we're putting into getting this answer right. And there are people, let's be fair, there are people on both sides of this. I think it's fair to say Richard has had a bit of a change of opinion, maybe. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but you know, I think he's maybe less supportive now of some of those sustainability implications than he once was, and that's fair. People are allowed to change their minds. Other people just don't think we should do it. Some people, you know, want us to do nothing else but reopen the airport. I'm trying to do the right thing for everybody, the maximum number of people in South Yorkshire, and move us forward, and that's my job. But I need to do that at the same time as showing everybody that, you know, this is being done in the right way, and ultimately that's got to be about transparency, accountability. It's why I think you guys are so important, and I know you've done a great job. The paper more broadly have done a great job of holding us to account, of absolutely challenging us where you need to. You know, everybody else has seen that as well, and I think that's really important, and that's what politics should be about, is, you know, us being transparent and accountable, and I guarantee I will do that wherever I can.
Brilliant, thank you for that question. Thank you for that answer. Sorry, Oliver. Another question on this subject from Thomas White. I think in your speech yesterday, Oliver, you were talking about how, you know, you think a lot of people in the area want to see the airport reopened. Thomas is asking, have the negative impacts of reopening an airport, he lists noise pollution, potential impacts on property prices and biodiversity. He says, have they been made clear to the public, as well as positive things like growth?
Yeah, I mean, look, that's not just on me. Is it clear? You know, clearly there are people in this space who want to kind of flag up the positives. There are people who want to flag up the negatives. I was down in Gatwick actually last week talking to them, because Gatwick, week before last, Gatwick reopened their south terminal. Gatwick's a much bigger airport, as people understand, right? But they reopened it after COVID, and we were talking to them about the challenges of that, so we could better understand what they went through. But one of the interesting things we were talking about with Gatwick was actually people around Gatwick love Gatwick. You know, there's a huge amount of enthusiasm and support. It's the further away you get from Gatwick, the more people then are kind of frustrated with noise or anything else. But people around Gatwick see it for what it is, which is a massive economic driver. And I think that's similar to DSA. I think people that are around the airport, and this won't be universal, so feel free to sort of shout to me online if that's you and, you know, you're in the flight path and you're not happy. But look, I think mostly people around DSA see the benefit, the value of reopening the airport, what it means for jobs and growth and opportunity for certainly Doncaster, but the wider South Yorkshire area. I think the further away you get from the airport, the more people are kind of worried about that. That seems to be the case, and that's fair. We are, of course, I am of course not immune to the arguments about the environmental impact or what else it might be doing in terms of noise. Of course, I'm not. You know, I'm aware of that, and that's what I mean about this balance that I'm trying to tread. I think it is right for us to try and reopen the airport. I think that is the right thing. It's got to be as part of a wider plan on sustainability and sustainable aviation, so we can be part of the solution, not just part of the problem. But that is the complexity. I think, look, politicians are to blame for this. Often we just come out, politicians don't really say, look, this is the right thing, everyone else is wrong, I'm right, no one else has got the answer, I've got the answer. I'm not saying that here. I'm saying there are people on both sides of this argument who've got valid points. I've taken a view, and my view is I want to try and reopen DSA. But that's not to say other people don't have a valid view, a valid position, and these are smart, sensible people, and I respect them. I just disagree. And I think we can do things to mitigate the challenges, accentuate the benefits, and hopefully create a better South Yorkshire for everybody. None of that is inevitable though, and that's why we're taking our time to make sure we get this right.
Brilliant, thank you very much for that question. Hope that helped answer your question, Thomas. Got a couple of questions from Anthony Barber and Kevin Gregory, which I'm going to group together because they were quite similar. A slightly different subject. They're asking, what assurances can you give that the people of South Yorkshire won't be priced out of their own airport? They said before, when it was open, it was often cheaper for them to go to Manchester or East Midlands Airport than flying from DSA. So is there anything you can say or reassure around that?
Given that, you know, we don't think passenger flights are going to happen before 2028, I'm probably not going to get into a pricing strategy at this moment. Really forgive me, I would love to be able to say, you know, flights will be cheaper than anywhere else. It has to be competitive, doesn't it? And we know that, and I think that's right, and it's a fair question. It has to be competitive, it has to be a place that people can afford to fly from. It can't be kind of silly money to fly from Doncaster and really cheap to fly from Liverpool, because we know what will happen. So we have to get that pricing strategy right. That's down to the airlines as much as it is to anybody else, and you know, we'll cross that bridge. But we are keen, obviously, for everyone in South Yorkshire to use DSA. That's got to be also about things like parking fees. You know, go out of Manchester these days and you're just dropping people off, it costs you an arm and a leg. So it's got to be about the wider environment, not just is it cheaper to fly it, is it cheaper to get there, is it cheaper to park, you know, has it got the facilities people want, is it a nicer environment, a nicer experience, has it got the right destinations? These are all questions we're going to have to answer, but we're not quite there yet. I'd love to be, but we're not quite there.
A couple of questions that follow on quite nicely from what you're saying about, you know, the wider infrastructure around the airport. Jonathan Haig and Steve White have asked, if this all goes ahead, will there be new transport links for the airport and South Yorkshire Airport City more widely? They mention tram train expansion, bus services, trains, those kind of things. I just wondered what you can say about the potential for transport.
Yeah. So we tried to get this going with the last government. So before the airport closed, I think one of the reasons why it didn't maintain its viability under the last owners was because the last government didn't commit to that £300 million East Coast Mainline link that the last Mayor Dan Jarvis asked for from the Tories. They didn't put that in place. East Coast Mainline link, again, we were turned down for that by the last government. I think that was the wrong decision on both fronts. I think that would have really helped the airport to succeed and also lowered the carbon impact and a bunch of other things besides. So really disappointed that they didn't commit to it. We're now kind of in a place where actually we are looking at all of that transport connectivity. So certainly when the buses come back under public control from 2027, what can we do to get better bus services into DSA to make it easier for people to travel from there? What can we do around things like tram train? What can we do around things like East Coast Mainline or Lincoln Line? I'm open to all those offers, frankly, and I want to look at those opportunities. There is a challenge there, of course, because like a lot of airports make money out of basically car parking nowadays. That's one of the ways they are more viable. So it used to be that airlines would pay you to fly out of the airport. So they would pay you a huge amount of money to run operations and run flights. But now increasingly, certainly with low-cost carriers, they don't pay you very much, if at all, to land at your airport. And the way that airports make money is through the car park. So actually we've got to try and balance some of those considerations to make the airport viable, but also to make sure that people have a good experience. And we've got that low carbon option of travelling by public transport into the airport as well. We're doing all of that work at the moment and looking at what those opportunities might be. And I haven't got the answers for anyone yet, but I'm certainly keen to explore those opportunities if we are able to take a funding decision going forward.
Brilliant. Thanks for that answer there, Oliver. So yeah, just again to remind anyone who is just joining us, we've missed a lot of good stuff. This is the Yorkshire Post Q&A with South Yorkshire Mayor Oliver Coppard. He's kindly given us an hour of his time to answer as many questions as he can about Doncaster Sheffield Airport. I think we're probably going to set a record on that front. Obviously keep sending them in and we'll try and get to as many as we can, and thank you so much for your engagement in this. We've got a question from Peter Jones, who said he's supporting...
Not the Peter Jones.
I don't
Dragon's Den Peter Jones.
I don't know.
Does he want to buy an airport?
It's maybe a Dragon's Den style question, okay, potentially. He's very supportive of the airport reopening, but he's asking, why is it the Doncaster gain share is going towards funding the airport when the wider South Yorkshire area is paying for the tram, which mainly helps Sheffield? So
I answered this question yesterday. So again, people, if they want to kind of watch the stuff we did yesterday, they can do. Look, it is the MCA's money. It's the combined authorities, South Yorkshire's money that's going potentially into the airport, right? The gain share that's given by government, people that don't understand the term, gain share is essentially £30 million that we get from government every year to fund the things we want to do with South Yorkshire as a mayoral combined authority, and that's the sort of devolution dividend that we got for signing the deal, having a mayor and moving forward. That £30 million then goes to pay for the things that we want to do as a region, and of course those things happen in places. Now, the reason why all of the local authority leaders and I are then engaged in a conversation about whether or not we can fund the airport is because it's South Yorkshire's money. It's in Doncaster, but it's South Yorkshire's money, and that's the money we're hoping to use to go forward. The transport money that we have in South Yorkshire, which is contributed by the local authorities as well by government, goes to fund not just a tram system but all the buses. And in places like Sheffield, the tram often replaces the bus. So you have a tram network where there aren't buses because we don't run buses that compete with the tram because that wouldn't make sense. We use the money therefore that goes into that system potentially then to fund buses in Barnsley where there isn't a tram, to Doncaster where there isn't a tram. But that doesn't mean that the tram system doesn't benefit everywhere in South Yorkshire, because A, it means that we can use some of the money that would otherwise have to go on buses to fund the tram but that means we can use the rest of the money to fund the buses. But it also means that we have people who can get where they need to be, when they need to be there. As a result, we have a bigger economy, a better economy for everyone in South Yorkshire, and everyone benefits. Now, I want the tram network to go right across South Yorkshire. So I want it to go to Doncaster. I want it to go more into Rotherham. I'd like it to go into Barnsley. All those places, I think, should have the tram network because it takes capacity off the train system and off the buses. It's lower carbon, it's more reliable, it's greener. Like, I think it's a better solution. That's why I'm supportive of the tram. The tram is good for South Yorkshire, and I would like the tram to be in Doncaster in particular. Over time, that's where I would like to get to, and that's where, you know, why we're funding it, why we've got it. It would cost 400 million quid to take the tram out, not to mention the economic disbenefit of no longer having a mass transit system. And lastly, I would just say, in other parts of this country, London in particular, they don't have to choose. They've got an underground, they've got a tram, they've got a cable car, they've got 3 airports that I can name off the top of my head. They've got a boat system, they've got everything. Why do we have to choose up north? Why is it a tram or a bus? Why is it an airport or a tram? Why is it any of those things? I am fighting for South Yorkshire to have all of that, and I refuse to apologise for that. I think South Yorkshire should have the best of all worlds, and we shouldn't put up with the fact that other cities have it. They've just announced in Manchester plans for an underground system. Why can't we have the best of all of it? And that's what I want for South Yorkshire.
Brilliant, thank you for that answer, Oliver. We've got a lot of questions coming in on the Facebook Live comments, so we're going to get through as many of those as we can in the next 13 minutes. We'll try and rattle through these as quickly as we can, and hopefully you guys watching will get some good answers to your questions. I think we've covered this a bit, so maybe just a quick answer, because I think we have already discussed this, but this is from Andy Tunstall, so if you missed some of this earlier, do go back and watch Andy. But Andy asks, to combat aviation emissions, do you see importance in renewable energy production around the site and surrounding industrial areas?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, but not just that though, I think we've got to have a sustainable aviation base at DSA. So as I say, not just part of the problem, part of the solution. We've already got a load of work going on in South Yorkshire around sustainable aviation. University of Sheffield is the only sustainable aviation fuel certifier in the country, really important. Their technology powered the first net zero transatlantic flight. We've got Boeing in the region because of the University of Sheffield. They've got a research project, the Compass facility, developing new lightweighting technology. So it's not just about sustainable or synthetic aviation fuels, it's about how do you make the planes lighter, how do you fly more sustainably, more broadly. We've obviously got hybrid air vehicles that we want to try and bring into the region as well. You know, so all these sorts of things could be find a real home in South Yorkshire going forward and help us, as I say, not just be part of the problem when it comes to aviation, but part of the solution. Because I don't know about you, anyone watching this, certainly me, I'm going to be flying in 20 years' time, right? I've got family that live abroad. Certainly when we think about the opportunities for South Yorkshire, some of those, I've been in China, I've been in America, I've been in Amsterdam, you name it, right? And I've been in different parts of the world, and we're all going to need to fly at some point if we're going to maintain that connectivity as a globe. But if we're going to fly in 20 years' time, with the climate crisis as it is, we need to fly more sustainably. And I want South Yorkshire to get a big piece of that market. If we've got that airport in South Yorkshire, then we can have that sustainable aviation system in South Yorkshire, that market, that sector, grow jobs and opportunity, and that's got to be better for the whole of the region. That relies on the airport, relies on us being able to get that over the line. I don't know if we can do it, but we're absolutely trying everything we can to make sure that that's the case.
Brilliant. Well, I hope that answered your question, Andy. We have got a question from Dave Tunstall, maybe a relation of Andy. I'm not sure, I'm afraid. But Dave has asked, can you see the public scepticism that the airport will never open for passenger flights after there was the starting point of 2026, which has been pushed back? Obviously, just to clarify, the Mayor of Doncaster, Ros Jones, said she hoped to get flights off by 2026. And yesterday, Oliver, in your speech, you said you thought commercial flights might not start until 2028.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to offer clarity, and I think that's what people see is, you know, I'm trying to be as open as I can, as transparent as I can about what we're doing, how we're doing it. And part of that is just being clear about what that timeline looks like. So, you know, I got this question a fair bit, obviously, before about spring 26. So I just wanted to be clear that 28 was the most obvious date for passenger commercial airlines to fly out of Doncaster. So I don't think that's a change. I just think it's a clarification, and I hope that's what people understand. Look, I get people are frustrated, sceptical, all the rest of it, And I would love to be able to sit on here and speak to you, and speak to Facebook, and go out there and give you a front page and say, look, regardless, damn it, we're just going to do whatever we need to get this over the line. But it's like me promising, as any politician can do, to do anything that is popular and then hopefully get people to forget it once you actually kind of realise that it was a mistake. I'm not prepared to put us in that position as a region. I'm not prepared to say, I don't care what the costs, I don't care what the challenges, we're doing it regardless, because in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years time, all we might have done is spend £150 million plus of public money and still be back in this position where we don't have that thriving airport that people want to see. And I'm not prepared to put us in that place. And I hope that's the difference between me as a politician, having that mayoral combined authority, having a mayor in South Yorkshire, somebody who looks people in the eye, sits here with people like you, sits here and says, this is actually the truth of the matter, and look, this is my home and my community, I'm determined to do the right thing for us as a region, and I'm going to do that listening and talking and being transparent, but ultimately we've got to do the right thing for the whole of the region for the long term, not just for a short-term political gain, because that's not what I'm about and that's not what this system should be about.
Brilliant, thanks for that answer. I hope that answered your question, Dave. So lots more comments coming in on the Facebook Live. Leslie Hudson has asked, I think this is in relation to something that the Doncaster Mayor Ross Jones said about how there are some companies which are operating around the airport at the moment. She says, if there are companies operating out of it now, what happens if the funding to reopen the airport doesn't go ahead? So yeah, we might just need to, I guess, clarify about how those companies are operating at the moment.
Yes, there's like 2XL, for instance, which I know you know it's where the Prime Minister was, who are operating out of DSA. They like to build a bigger presence, by the way, in Doncaster. Their plan has always been to keep their operations in one place, and at the moment they've got people in Humberside, they've got some people down south, and they want to kind of reinvest in South Yorkshire, which is one of the things obviously that we're looking at the moment. Look, I don't want to get into what ifs about what if we don't, because I think it's unhelpful in terms of business confidence, in terms of people. We'll cross that bridge. We'll cross that bridge if we come to it, and I'm happy, as I say, to come back and do this again. But I think it can be, and hopefully will be, a magnet for investment. That's what we're weighing up at the moment. Can we bring in more companies, more investment? Can we make it thrive? And can we make the numbers stack up? Have we got enough money to make the numbers stack up? Can we make it work within the confines of the lease and everything else? And that's the question that we're answering at the moment. If we aren't able to do that, I'm happy to come back on and talk to people about what next. But for now, let's try and be positive and look to the future.
Brilliant. So thank you for that answer, Oliver. So we've only got a few more minutes in our Q&A on Doncaster Sheffield Airport with South Yorkshire Mayor Oliver Coppard. Thank you for sticking with us, and I hope it's been worthwhile. I'm sure it has been. So many questions answered. Still a few more to go. So 3 more currently on the Facebook comments, so we should have time for those. Paul Foster asks about Munich Airport International being the operator. He basically says, are you concerned that if commercial flights don't take off until 2028, are they going to keep operating the airport? Some of this might be commercially sensitive, but any
I mean, I can't probably get into a huge amount of commercial detail, but all I would say is I think we've got a really good partner in Munich. There are other people in the system that I think we probably want to bring in to help us with some of the questions that we have and the challenges that we face, and make that work. Frankly, the more expertise, the better from my perspective. So Munich are great. We're talking to all sorts of people. Like I say, I was down at Gatwick just the other day trying to pick their brains about how they did what they did. They were really generous with their time. World-class airport there, and we were learning from them. So Munich, brilliant. Got no worries there. I think they're a great partner, and long may we continue working with them.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Oliver. A question from Lynn Needham. She is asking about the due diligence that you've been doing, and he's basically said, why wasn't this done earlier in the process of RIA?
And so, Lynn, good question. So basically, we did do a load of work in the intervening period, as you'd expect, but when the model changed, the financial model, so when we decided actually those deals weren't right for South Yorkshire, the private sector investment wasn't right, it wasn't the right model for us, we didn't get a good enough deal for you, for me, for taxpayers, we actually moved to a different model, which required us to do a huge amount more work. And so that's what we put in now. We've done that at pace, record pace, frankly. So as I say, we'll have 1,000 pages of investment grade due diligence. We'll share the vast majority of that when we can, because I think it's important to see the amount of work that's gone in, some of the challenges we face. But we were doing that work on the basis that actually it's a different model and it's a different system that we wanted to put in place. It required us to do different things to sign off that investment, and that's where we are right now.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for that, Oliver. So we've got one final question. Thank you very much for your time today. You've answered an incredible amount of questions. We really appreciate it. Final question comes from Chelsea Pandora, which I think we touched on a little bit earlier. So if you missed any of this, do go back and watch it. The whole of the broadcast will be available on our Facebook channel. Chelsea asks, do you feel we'll receive enough vendors of flights to compete with Leeds, Bradford and Manchester, given the transport links from South Yorkshire to those places?
Well, I want to improve transport connectivity to Manchester Airport, to Manchester, to Leeds. It's one of the things we're arguing with the government about at the moment. I want that investment, of course I do. It's only right that kind of we as South Yorkshire are better connected to the whole of the country. It's one of the ways you grow an economy, and I'm determined to do that. But equally, I know that we can offer a good opportunity, good service at DSA, that we can get in those flights and get people flying out of DSA on their holidays and everything else. But it can't, as I say, be about just passenger flights. It's got to be about freight, it's got to be about private, it's got to be about the wider gateway site, sustainable aviation, advanced manufacturing. That's what we're trying to do. That's why this is complicated and it's hard, and it is a competitive space. And Leeds is a great airport, Manchester Airport's a great airport. I would say we offer something different at DSA, or potentially offer something different at DSA. Voted the best airport in the country, I think 4 times in a row, or whatever it was. Really exciting place to fly from, brilliant place to fly from. When I went on my holidays. But look, we've got to kind of prove our worth in the market, and the market is pretty remorseless. And so, if we are able to reopen the airport, that's one of the challenges that we face, and that's why we are taking our time to get the right decision. It'd be easy for me, as I say, to just take a quick decision. I am determined not to just do the quick thing, the politically expedient thing. I'm determined to get this right for South Yorkshire, and that's hopefully what people have heard over the course of the last hour, can see from me on a daily basis, but hopefully we'll understand as we move forward through this process.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today,
My pleasure.
Oliver.
Thanks everybody.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. Just a reminder, if you missed any of it, it'll all be put on our Facebook page and also broadcast on the website. And I'm sure we'll be able to read plenty about this on the Yorkshire Post in the run-up to when we expect the decision to be on September the 9th. So thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you.